I'm Mark Caro, and welcome to episode 216 of Caropop. If you'd like to throw us some support and help keep this thing going, please go to caropop.com. Our guest this week spans the worlds of music, baseball, and broadcasting, Len Kasper. He's just starting his 6th season as the Chicago White Sox radio play-by-play announcer, though I got to know him during his previous 16 years working as the Cubs television play-by-play announcer. For several years, Kasper collaborated with then Cubs president Theo Epstein in organizing the Chicago version of the annual Hot Stove Cool Music All-Star Charity Concert. Kasper not only rounded up artists, who included Eddie Vedder, Liz Phair, and recent Caropop guest Tom Morello, but he also strapped on his bass and played with the bands. Kasper, you see, is a musician and, it turned out, a songwriter. The precursor to Caropop was a live onstage interview series I hosted at the Evanston Club Space. It was called, logically, Mark Caro's Talkin' in Space. Kasper was a guest, and at the end of our conversation, he debuted his new band, then called The 45. It is another Chicago all-star lineup, with Score Sports Radio co-host Matt Spiegel on lead vocals, recent Caropop guest Juhlin and Liam Davis on guitars, Gerald Dowd on drums, and Kasper holding down the bass and doing all the songwriting. The name soon changed to Sonic 45, for reasons Kasper explains here, and the band has released 2 albums, both produced by Davis, Space and Time from 2021 and Supersonic from 2024. The sound is tough, swirling and dark-edged, reflecting Kasper's love of 1980s bands such as Echo and the Bunnymen and The Call. Kasper's lyrics, though, are vulnerable and revealing, such as on the song Pills, when he reflects on modern medicine's positive effect on his anxiety. Kasper is similarly open in talking about his love of music and baseball and the occasional intersection of the two. When he was a kid, did he dream more of being a baseball announcer, a player, or a musician? Did he always prefer radio to television announcing? How did he pick up the bass and start writing songs? Is he a lyrics or music first kind of writer? Does he do most of the arranging ahead of time or let his talented bandmates work out their parts? Did he consider singing the songs himself? Do his baseball colleagues know about his music career? And was it coincidental that he left the Cubs TV gig for the White Sox radio job just a few weeks after Epstein left the Cubs? Whether talking about baseball, broadcasting, or music, Kasper is soft-spoken yet passionate, one of the most thoughtful and talented guys around. Please enjoy this Caropop conversation with Len Kasper. So first of all, I really should thank you because in a way, you helped create Caropop. When we talked at Space, great conversation, and the debut performance of the 45, soon to be Sonic 45, you were kind of the germ for that. So thank you.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah, and you mentioned it was the 45. So the story goes, I don't even know when this was. Shortly after that, I think, I got a nasty message. It had to be Twitter because I think that's the only social media I was on at the time. I got like a direct message from a guy in St. Louis.
Of course.
And they had a band. There was a band called the 45, and essentially it was a very angry, how dare you, and I'm going to sue the pants off you. And,
oh, Jesus.
And, at the time I'm like, ugh, because I had searched high and low to make sure that we weren't taking the name of a band that had already existed. And I don't know how, but I know that the word Sonic came to my mind in talking to Liam Davis, our guitar player and producer, and I don't know why Sonic 45. I think my wife Pam might have said it. She's like, why don't you just say Sonic 45? And I'm like, that's actually better. And so I replied to the guy and I said, no problem, we'll change it. And it was early enough where it didn't matter. Nobody really knew who we were.
Right, the record wasn't out yet. So
correct. So it kind of worked out that way. But
were they like an established band down there, or like because you'd done your searching, so like they couldn't have been that big.
I am going to look and see if they're on. So there's a band called the 45s that I knew of.
With an S on the end.
With an S. And then let's see, artists. I'm looking at, so I have Apple Music and there is no the 45, but I did find them somewhere. Okay, so if you scroll way down, there are actually 2 bands there are three. I mean, anybody can pretty much publish stuff, but I see four bands now that are the 45. So whatever. But they had been around for a while. I think he had said like, "Hey, we've been around for 10 years, and it's we don't want searches coming up." And I'm like, "Yeah, cool, that's fine, no problem."
Right. Yeah. But he wasn't nice about it though, so that he loses points.
Well, at the beginning, he was just kind of like, "Hey, dude, like, what are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, okay, no problem, yeah." So,
well, you're like, "Yeah, forgive me for never having heard of you."
Yeah, I mean, I
you weren't snarky about it, but it's sort of like, but coming out, with your guns blazing, taking a tone with someone, it's not like, you called yourselves the Red Hot Chili Peppers and didn't know there was another Red Hot Chili Peppers out there.
Right. So, lesson learned, but again, it worked out, and I felt pretty confident Sonic 45 would not have been taken by anyone else.
No, Sonic 45 is cool. I like it. And then
it does sound a little more post-punk, I guess, or new wave.
Right. And then you can call an album Supersonic, and it's kind of tying in with that. So that's cool.
Yeah.
When you were a kid, did you have dreams first of being a musician or being like a sportscaster or player for that matter?
Always sports. I was always into music. My mom had Beatles and Stones and Monkees records that I would play nonstop. My grandfather was really into Johnny Cash and country music. So music was always a big part of my childhood, but I always wanted to probably play baseball, and I realized at a pretty early age that wasn't going to be a realistic possibility. So broadcasting kind of just hit me in the right place when I was 12 or 13. I thought this would be the coolest job ever. So I was pretty much committed at that point to wanting to be a sports broadcaster, and more specifically a baseball broadcaster. And I probably would say the oldies, the stuff that from the 60s was probably what I first got into just because of my family. But then when I was 17, I was a junior in high school, and there's a tiny radio station about 5 miles from our house, and a guy who my parents knew had started the station, and it was going to be an oldie station, and I got hired to basically be a board operator. And it was a satellite music station, so there wasn't a lot of work to do. It was just play commercials kind of a couple times an hour. And so at that point, like, I played in my head over, and I mean, I learned every hit song from like 1958 to 1975. I pretty much knew when I was in high school. And so that kind of instructed me. So when I went to college at Marquette in Milwaukee, all my friends were into the Replacements and kind of the current stuff at the time, and I was into the Doors and the Beatles. So I was kind of different from everybody else, but I got into their music, and then I got them into the music that I liked, which was pretty cool. And I've kind of bounced around in terms of favorite genres over my life, but I love it all. I really do. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm a metalhead at all, but like there's some metal stuff that I appreciate. Anything that's the best in its genre, I can appreciate. I feel like I have a good ear for, if it's good, it's good, right? And I make no bones about it. Like, if there's a good Madonna song or a good Def Leppard song, like, it's in my playlist. Like, I don't care who did it. If it's a good song, if I like it, it'll make it. I don't ever worry about like, oh, I can't put that song in my daily listening routine. It's like, no, I like this song. It's a good song.
When did you write your first song? What was it?
The first songs I wrote were with my college roommate. We formed a band in Milwaukee in the mid-90s, and pretty much everything was co-written, and a lot of it kind of came about during rehearsals and practices and stuff, where we would just riff and then kind of keep going. just because the technology was not obviously as good. I had a recorder at home, but it was a little more difficult to record stuff on my own. I think the song's called Trees Are Laughing is the first one I wrote for a band called Your Indentured Servants, which was fun. And then I was in a band called The Knowledge, which was kind of a power pop thing that we did. And we recorded a few songs but never put anything out. And then I got the kind of the big break of my career. The Florida Marlins hired me to be their TV announcer. And we had a son who was a year old. And so like my personal life and my career really changed dramatically. And so I kind of left the music stuff behind. And I should note I'm a bass player.
Right. That was my next question, which I almost folded into the last one, was when you started playing bass, and I assume you were playing bass in these bands?
Yes. So I've always played bass. Very rudimentary guitar player. I think I'm decent enough just to, fake my way through a demo. And I can get back to that. Actually, that was a benefit for the first Sonic 45 record, but I kind of stepped away from it in the early 2000s just because my baseball career and family stuff there wasn't enough time. And I kind of got back into it when I got to Chicago, and when Theo Epstein took over the Cubs, I had befriended Bill Janovitz from Buffalo Tom, and I knew that they had done these Boston charity concerts, Hot Stove Cool Music, and I remember it might have been the day Theo got the job. I think I was playing Words with Friends with Bill, and I think I messaged him, we should probably bring this to Chicago, and he's like, that's a great idea. And that's kind of basically how it started, and Hot Stove Cool Music became an annual event at Metro. It had already been an annual thing at Paradise Club in Boston. And so that got me back into playing bass, and really, from that moment forward, probably 2012, 2013, that's when it really kicked off for me. And I felt like the 10-year break or whatever was really good for me, because I had learned some things and listened to a ton more music, got to know a lot of musicians. And then I was just around professional musicians, and that was hugely important for me. And I just soaked up as much musical knowledge as I could. And back to the Sonic 45 part of it, the stuff I started to write, and I had never written stuff on my own. It was always in a band setting, or at least with another band member. And I thought, I want to create a band, a concept that is very hyper-focused on what we are, as opposed to just like, let's just jam and see what comes out of it. That was the opposite of what I wanted.
Right.
So I was like, I wanted something where you hear it immediately and okay, this is what it is. This is the mood. And I had very specific ideas of the people I wanted to be in that band, and I wanted to write the songs. And so when I gave these demos to Liam and Doug Juhlin and Matt Spiegel and Gerald Dowd, they all loved them. But when we started to record them, the guitar players in particular admitted that they tried to be guitar players. And then a few of the songs, they realized, let's just do what Len did on the demo. Like, it was weird how they felt my rudimentary playing actually served the songs better than their musicianship did, if that makes sense.
Huh.
There was one song in particular, and it was eye-opening for them because this is a genre they had never really played before, and it was really exciting. Everybody in the band loved the idea and the music, and they were all like Echo and the Bunnymen fans and Psychedelic Furs, and you go down the list, but they had never really played it. So it was a very different thing that they were asked to do. And there was a song and there was a solo, and Doc just shredded it. I mean, everybody in the studio was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then we listened to it, and then it might have been that day or the next day, I think Liam and I were like, doesn't fit. It's a rock solo, and that's not what this band is. And Dog agreed. And then Dog redid the solo, and it was simpler and more fitting of the song. But he kind of had to unlearn some things. And so I feel really good that this project, not only is everyone in love with it, and we don't play a lot, but I think it tapped some other parts of their musical talent that they hadn't really used, if that makes sense.
Right. Well, it's, you were playing on stage with the Chicago All-Stars at these Hot Stove Cool Music shows, and you have Chicago All-Stars playing with you. I mean, these are like some of the best players here. And Dog was a guest recently on Caropop, and Gerald and Liam and Matt are also fantastic. And Matt also does sports, talk radio on The Score, afternoon host. So you guys have the music baseball, thing going on as well. When you were demoing these songs, were you demoing like the bass parts and the guitar parts and doing overdubs as opposed to just like sitting with an acoustic guitar and, hammering it out?
Yeah, so I'm bouncing around a little bit, but I'll answer the question best I can. So one of my all-time favorites and became a very good friend, Tommy Keene, who passed away, I think, around 2017.
Right.
But we talked a lot, and I was a super fan of Tommy's. And I kind of bribed him about 20 years ago. I talked to him on the phone and basically was like, I'll get you tickets he lived in LA, and I was like, I'll hook you up to a Cubs Dodgers game, but you need to talk to me for a half hour about your music. I'm just going to pick your brain. He's like, yeah, no problem.
Nice.
So I kind of got to know Tommy, and the one thing he did, and, later through Tommy and friends of his, I got my hands on demos that he did that were never released. They were just demos of songs that I loved. And I was struck by how similar, not only structurally, they were all exactly like the finished product, but he played every instrument, and production-wise, it sounded really good. I mean, it sounds like a demo. Like if you listen to it, it's not a finished song. But the way he did it was he would hand it to his, like the bass player, Brad Quinn, like he could change something if he wanted. But for the most part, these demos were kind of like, this is what I want it to sound like. And so I decided that I wanted to give everyone an idea of this is the vibe, this is the thing. And I think this genre too, atmosphere is everything. And so a lot of it starts with drum beats, and, the adage is you want to make them dance and cry at the same time. And so I just felt like the demos had to have that atmosphere and that vibe. And it worked because all of the guys in the band really liked it. And I told them all, none of this is set in stone. And there were some changes made along the way. Maybe a section was doubled, or Dog would do a different solo or a different little spin on a lead riff that I had. But I would say in most cases, 85 to 90% of the song was kind of done in terms of
interesting
in the demo.
Right, because there's a lot of intricate guitar play and guitar sounds in there. I mean, as you mentioned, you mentioned Echo and the Bunnymen. I mean, certainly when you listen sonically, it has that kind of mid-late 80s sound, sort of that gothic thing at times. Like, again, Echo and the Bunnymen, or The Call, or some of the harmonics on the guitar, and the way like sort of the echo effects and chorus effects that are on those, and yeah, that kind of dense punch that I just remember being like a fixture of like the alternative radio I was listening to when I lived in Boston, and I would listen to WFNX. Like this would have fit with that, even though when you listen to it now, it doesn't sound like a throwback. It just sounds like something that's inspired by that. So like the little riffs in there mixing with the harmonics and stuff, was that stuff that you had sort of worked out ahead of time?
Most of it.
Interesting.
Yeah, most of it.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, there are probably, like I said, there are probably a couple of examples where, well, let's put it this way. It's all there. Dog plays it better. Like, there's nothing that you'll listen to that I play that like just sounds better, but it gives Dog the roadmap to do it.
Pretty detailed roadmap.
His fingers are better than mine, but like, yeah, the notes are all there. It's just he knows how to do it better than I do. Right. So I don't have to yeah, I don't have to perfect it necessarily, but I'm glad. Like, what really makes me happy when you say the call and Echo and the Bunnymen, and I'm unapologetic about what I wanted it to be, and I don't know why at this time in my life this particular type of music has become my favorite. I do think that it's a callback to being a kid, and I did like this music, even though I probably at the time didn't delve it as deeply into it as I have now. And I will say the one record, if there's a record that has influenced this band and this idea, it's The Blurred Crusade by The Church. It's the second record they did. It was 1982, and it got released in Australia, but never got released properly at the time in the States. So it became kind of a collector's item. Now it's pretty much widely available. But I think it's kind of a perfect album. And there are a couple of little hints in there where you hear some intros and things, and you're like, oh, okay, I see why Len liked this. And I told Liam, I want the atmosphere from that record, and he did some research on how they recorded it. And so there are some touches in the production and the sound that kind of come from 1982. I mean, there's some stuff about it that sounds dated, and I don't think our stuff sounds dated, but I did want to recapture kind of that sound because it just hits me in the right place. So I think people who grew up in that and really like that stuff, I think they all agree that that it works. It works to this day.
Yeah, I don't know that Church record. I caught up with them a little later, Under the Milky Way and all that. But you guys do nail the sound on these records, and yeah, no, they're like muscular, but also really atmospheric, and and then there are the words too. And at what point in the composition of these songs are the words coming in? Like, are you which? So are you structuring the whole thing and then putting words on it?
No, but I'm definitely writing the music first and getting the vibe, and then figuring out what the heck should this be about. Yeah, the lyrics are the hardest part. It's the scariest part, I think, because when people figure out what the words are, I think, the music part is easy in a lot of ways, but sometimes you got to match the words to it. And, some of it's autobiographical, kind of the first song that everybody really grabbed onto. And friends of mine who I can trust their opinion, where they don't just tell me, oh, it's great. Like, they're like, the song Pills is the one that really grabs them. And, that song is very autobiographical. And the chorus is not meant to be coy or specific or anything. It's just a chorus that could be taken as many ways as possible. But the line is, "You'll be fine if you take your pills." And I really didn't know that I had suffered from anxiety, and it kind of came to a head around 2007, 2008, and I finally got on some medication, and it kind of, I wouldn't say saved my life, but it changed my life in a lot of ways. I was super distracted. I had lost a ton of weight, and I was on edge all the time. And I think feeling the pressures of a high-powered job. And so that's kind of the genesis of that song. And I thought it would be an interesting spin on that, right? So you could say pills, that can mean a lot of different things. And it could be either you'll be fine if you take your pills, kind of like you probably shouldn't do it, or in my case, yeah, you probably should. So that's kind of, at that point, in a way, that was one of the first songs I wrote, and it was one of the most personal songs. And it was hugely important for me to do that, because when people said, "Oh, this is really good," then I thought, "Oh, okay, I'm okay then," as opposed to like, "Oh God, I'm showing a part of me that I don't know if I want people to see," but they seem to like it. So I thought, all right, I'm okay then.
Well, music reveals things, and part of what's great about this project and interesting about it is that it is really personal. Like, despite this sort of swirl, I mean, you could, with all these swirling guitars and everything, you could be singing about, like, I was on a rocket ship to Mars and da 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 da. But it's actually very grounded. And on Pills, you're singing, you don't need to be ashamed to walk around in this town, despite what everybody says. It's okay.
Yeah.
And honestly, that's something that a lot of people, a lot of listeners, a lot of people, period, can relate to and maybe need to hear. And you don't hear that in rock and roll so much, because rock and roll, or just rock, just tends to have more of a, like, look at me strutting around kind of, energy. But, I mean, going back to the Beatles, I mean, John Lennon was singing Help, and, and you read those lyrics and like, no, he means it, and that's where the power of the stuff comes in. So I think that you revealing the stuff in the context of this music is, like something that everyone can relate to.
Well, I appreciate it. And I also think, another reason why I picked this area of the rock genre to explore is that it's super serious. How many Cure songs and how many, right, are like, ha ha ha, like, a lot of it's sad and kind of depressing, but it kind of hits at something that we all think about. And I knew that in some ways, me doing this, people would roll their eyes and go, who gives a crap? It's a sports guy or whatever. And I don't sing the songs for people who haven't heard any of it. That was also very specific. I'm not a good enough singer to lead a band, and I didn't want to do it. I just wanted to write the music and be in a really cool band. But I figured if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it for the right reasons and have it be as meaningful to me and to us as possible. And I really mean this when I say it. I mean, I'm super happy and appreciative when people say they like it. But Doug Juhlin, who is touring around with Jason Narducci and Michael Shannon playing REM songs, and in some cases with the original members of the band. He's been in Poi Dog Pondering. He's just this giant of a guitar player. Gerald Dowd's played with everybody on the planet. You mentioned Matt is one of the best singers around, and Liam I just adore, and he's been a great producer. These are really impressive professional musicians. They love this record and this music, and that's all that matters to me. Like, I've already won, you know what I mean? So if other people like it, it's great. But the fact that they are like, I not only love this, but I want to play this music with you and record it and play it live, it's already been a super success, I think.
No, and you have a great energy together, too. I mean, you could tell that you all like each other and like playing together as well. And you certainly, as a bass player, are right up there with everyone else. It's like I mean, I remember seeing you, I think the first time was probably at Hot Stove Cool Music, and I was like, oh, he's really good at bass. Like, he locks in on the groove, he's playing melodic parts. Like, I could, when I start a band, I could see asking Len to be the bassist.
Well, the Hot Stove Cool Music's hilarious because I kind of became the leader of the Chicago group. So what would generally happen is you get a headliner, band or an artist, and then there would be like the Boston All-Stars, and we're talking Tanya Donnelly,
right.
Gail Greenwood, Kay Hanley, Bill Janovitz, Mike Gent. I mean, like, these powerhouse musicians. And all the guys in Sonic 45, before they were part of the Chicago All-Stars. And we could kind of do whatever we wanted. So I kind of came up with a little short set list. And the way it worked was I knew every nook and cranny of every song we would play. And they were cover songs of songs we loved. And most of the other musicians, certainly the Boston musicians, it was kind of a joke, like a little funny, friendly rivalry that the Chicago band, when we would go to rehearse, we kind of had our crap together and it kind of immediately sounded okay. Whereas the Boston people, they just kind of learned it on the fly. But professional musicians, they can learn stuff in like 2 seconds. So, so I would be the guy they would go to on the arrangement where they'd be like, Len, what do we do here? And I'm like, no, it goes here, here, here. Oh, okay. And then you tell them and then they got it. But a lot of times when you present the material to them, they're like, they'll listen to it a couple times and they'll just show up and be like, okay, what key is this in? So I had to be the person, because I'm not the longtime professional, that I had to know my stuff. And so kind of people would roll their eyes, but I would tell them I make no apologies for it, because if I'm going to play with Eddie Vedder, I better know Keep on Rocking in the Free World.
Right. And know what key it's in.
And exactly. It's funny too, because I played Can't Explain, and I think The Kids Are All Right. And I think Can't Explain, the day before I found out we're moving it down a step. And so I'm like, oh my gosh. So I had to like immediately, and it's a pretty simple song, but if you go from B to A, every note you hit is going to be different than you're used to.
Yeah, and you can't capo it down, so you're
not
just
on bass.
Stuck. Yeah.
Not on bass. So you just have to be able to go with the punches, and, it's... and then I was playing Rockin' in the Free World with Eddie, and he at one point turned around at Metro, and we were both just dripping in sweat. There were 15 people on stage, and he came right over to me while we're playing the song, and he put his head down, and he just jammed his head right into my chest. And I backed up, and we fell into the amp, and we're still playing, and I'm like, dude... I'm not used to this. It was a great moment, and we got through it, but it was very touching that he did that, and he was just so excited. But I was like, I thought I could fall off the rails there.
Yeah, you got pearl jammed into the amp.
100%.
Yeah. So I've heard you sing. I've heard you sing karaoke, in fact. You are a nice singer with a good voice. Did you, A, ever consider, being the front man on this, and B, would you ever go to, like, I don't know, just like a open mic thing somewhere and just try out some songs, just singing them and seeing how they go over?
Yeah, I've thought about it. I in the first band I was in Milwaukee, I was the singer, and it was a lot. I just felt it was a lot of pressure, and, that was kind of the big decision I had to make with this band. And I just thought, there are other people who I think can bring it to life, and I think I kind of know my lane, and I think if I had been the front man, and I think the other guys in the band agreed, it would be probably taken less seriously by some people. But I think when they see the band in action, they realize that I'm not just like, this isn't some sort of vanity play where I'm just showing everybody how cool I am. There's a great video, I don't know if you've seen it, and I haven't really heard his band, and I don't think he sings, but does Keanu Reeves is in a band, right?
Dogstar a long time ago. Yeah.
And I've seen him play, and he's good, but he seems very content to just be up on stage playing bass, and I'm like, that's cool, but if he's up there singing, I feel like it's too much of him, and I'm not comparing myself to him, but I am saying that if somebody knows you in terms of some other thing, it can be a little jarring if you're doing both. I'm trying to think of like who would qualify. You're like Eddie Van Halen on bass, and Spiegs is David Lee Roth. There you go. Right.
Not Sammy Hagar though.
Right.
Maybe Sammy Hagar, not Sharon.
Well, who's like a famous actor who you find you like the music? Like Billy Bob Thornton has a band. I've never really heard his stuff.
Kevin Costner has a band. I saw him play at the Field of Dreams. Speaking of the baseball music crossover, right. Kevin Bacon has a band. Jared Leto has a band. So yeah, there's some.
Is there any of that you really like or find interesting?
Russell Crowe has a band, 30 Odd. Well, he has a different band now. I remember it was 30 Odd Grunts or something like that.
Yeah,
that's a good question. I don't know.
And again, I don't want to overstate it. Like, this is just a tiny little thing I wanted to do separate from my job. But, I was a little cognizant of just people rolling their eyes and saying, who cares? This sports guy doing whatever. Yeah, and I feel the same way. And so I didn't want to make it that, I guess, is my point.
The music always stands and falls on its own. I mean, that's the thing.
I would hope.
If the songs are good, then who cares who's doing them? And people come from a lot of different backgrounds when they finally have their records, albums, hits, whatever. Do people in your baseball world know of your music efforts?
Some do, and then some learn about it, and then they hear it, and they're like, oh, that's really cool. But I don't ever tell anybody. No, it's not something that comes up. Like, if they find it, they find it.
Like, have you had any players say, hey, I just heard your record. It's really cool.
I've had a couple players, but it's usually they're tipped off by somebody else. Like we'll be talking music, and then like the PR person will be like, Len has a band. I'm like, thanks. But yeah, I've had a few people. Yeah, for sure. It's cool. Kyle Teal, White Sox catcher,
Right.
played acoustic guitar at Sox Fest, and he was really good. He played with the house band that was there at the time, and yeah, I was like, "That's awesome, man!" But I wasn't like, "Hey, I'm in a band too. You should jam with me sometime." I didn't do that because I do think that there are a lot of baseball players who do play the guitar on the road just on their own, and there is this thing where rock musicians want to be baseball players and baseball players want to be musicians, and I think that's the genesis of hot stove cool music and why it kind of works.
Right. You introduced me to the Baseball Project. The first time they came to town, I think they were playing House of Blues, and it was part of a fundraiser that you were hosting, and I interviewed you and Scott McCoy and maybe Steve Wynn at that. But I know that I met them there, and Peter Buck was there as well.
Yeah.
Linda Pittman.
Amazing.
I've had like 4 of the 5 Baseball Project people on Caropop. Again, pretty great intersection of music and baseball there. I mean, they're great songs, great guys, great musicians, but also baseball fans.
And Scott is like the Zelig of rock music. He and I will occasionally text. Like I'm a 2 to 3 nights a week, 9:30 to 11 p.m. before bedtime, like lying in bed on my iPad doing a YouTube deep dive on some obscure, live performance by Genesis or something. And I had read the Keith Moon biography. I have actually 2 stories about that. And there was the infamous story of him basically ODing and passing out in San Francisco. I think it was the Cow Palace. He just literally crumpled, and they had to carry him off the stage. And I think Pete said, "Are there any drummers here?" And some kid raised his hand.
Read about that story, yeah.
And came up on stage and finished the set. Scott was there. It was 1973.
Wow.
Scott was in the crowd at the time. So whenever there are these little quirky stories about all these great things, I will text him like, "Were you there? Or what do you know about this?" And probably 2 out of 3, he's like, "Oh yeah, well, I know this guy, or I happen to see them here." And I know what it was. I just finished about 6 months ago, I think it was, the Badfinger biography, which is amazing and such a sad story.
The Dan Mattavino one?
Yes, and Scott is, yes. Have you read that book?
I have. It's very hard to find now because it's been out of
Really
print, and
Yes.
I was in touch with Dan, and then at some point I was going to wish him happy birthday on Facebook, and I was like, oh, and I saw all these like RIP things with him. I was like, oh crap.
So sad.
Yeah.
But Scott is in the book. Dan talked to him about some shows that he saw in like 75, either before or after Pete had died. And so I was texting him about the Badfinger stuff. But back to Keith Moon, this is where like my job is really kind of amazing in a strange way. We were in Fort Worth, Texas. Cubs were playing the Rangers, and I walked into the hotel bar, and I said, "Oh my God, that's Bruce Johnston and Mike Love." And I walked up and I said, "Hey guys, don't mean to bug you, but huge Beach Boys fan, and Bruce, I just finished the Keith Moon book." And he went, "Oh," they were best friends, and they couldn't have been nice. Bruce could not have been nicer. "Yeah, hey, how you doing?" I told him who I was. And I said, "So I got to ask, is the Keith Moon story true about Pet Sounds?" He goes, "It's 100% true." So the story goes, Bruce flew to London with a copy of Pet Sounds on vinyl, and Keith had a Bentley, and he had a record player in his car.
Wow.
And they put the record on in the car and drove around, and he said it was skipping and whatever.
Yeah, I was going to say, you have to have pretty good suspension to have a turntable in a car.
So he said, "Let's go back to my hotel room." So they went back to the hotel room, and Keith listened to it. And so Keith Moon was the biggest Beach Boys fan on the planet. And that's how he became friends with Bruce. And if people don't know, Bruce basically joined the Beach Boys to become Brian Wilson on the road. Brian did not want to tour. Right. Bruce kind of filled in for him, and then he's been in the band ever since. So he said all Keith loved was surf music. That's all he wanted to do. He wanted to be in the Beach Boys. And they played the record, and he said, I could tell Keith hated it. Keith didn't get it because it's not a surf record, right? It was not what you would expect. And then Bruce, in this conversation with me, casually drops, well, you know, Paul and John and Linda come over, and they listened to it. And I think he said we listened to it 2 times all the way through. And then in the book, it says that night, Paul McCartney went home and wrote Here, There, and Everywhere. And then Pet Sounds essentially, quote, forced the Beatles to do Sgt. Pepper. So that's one of the great kind of benchmark rock moments ever. And Bruce basically told me all of it is absolutely true. It happened exactly how it was portrayed. And so that was really cool.
That's great.
That I just randomly ran into a couple of members of the Beach Boys.
Yeah, you're like, I happen to have Bruce Johnson right here. Is this true? And he's like, yep, that's it. Great moment in history. Yeah, Paula would always say that God Only Knows was the greatest pop song ever.
That's it. Yeah, I think they were pretty blown away by what they heard that night. But I just love the idea that we know the moment that they heard it, like the guy, it just all kind of came together in one crazy night, and we know exactly when they heard it, exactly what the reaction was. You know, a lot of this stuff kind of gets lost into the ether of history, but this is a great moment, and we have specific evidence that it happened.
I love stories like that.
Well, and you know, the Beatles stuff too. Get Back was great. And what I loved about it, and I don't know if Peter Jackson, right? He was a director.
Yeah.
I don't know if this
put all that stuff together.
And I don't know if this was by design, but what I loved about the way he did it and the way it was presented is that it was boring and it was mundane. And it was the first time I'd ever felt like I'd experienced the 4 Beatles as real humans, where they were not in the spotlight, and how hard they had to work to create music and how human they looked. Because there was this, it's like you got a real peek behind the curtain, right? And then obviously there was tension, and George is like, everything George does is just amazing. And Paul and John are like, yeah, whatever. Anyway, back to our thing. But what I took out of that was writing songs is really hard. The guys who were the best at it in the history of ever, they struggled with it too. And as you're hearing these songs that are seared into our brain, like the first part of that process, I felt like, I don't know how you were, but you're kind of like, no, don't do that. Go, oh, yep, you found it.
Right.
Like you're almost trying to like veer them toward the thing that they ended up doing, but it's the things that they were doing, quote, wrong that made it really cool. I think even the engineer at one point in Let It Be was telling Paul, like, no, keep going. Like this piano thing just should keep going one more bar. I loved that.
Yeah, you and the audience, like, you know how the songs turned out, but the Beatles, don't know how it's turning out when they're actually happening in real time. And also, it captured that feeling of like how long, I mean, even though, you know, it's still like however many hours that series was, it's still a lot shorter than the amount of time they spent in the studio. But you get a sense of the you know, the fact that you have to sit around and wait, and then you have to sort of noodle around and figure stuff out. And, you know, one of the funnest stories I did was at some point, there was a John Martin, tribute record being recorded by Jim Tullio, who's a producer actually in Evanston, and he had the Swell season come down. They were playing at Ravinia, and it was like Glenn Hansard and Marquetta and the whole band, and I just spent the day watching them sort of record this thing, and they sort of like went in one direction and then another, and by the end of the day they had a finished song. And I love that process stuff, but it takes a while, you know, and you sort of never, and then you get to the end of it and it's like, well, of course it couldn't have been anything but, you know, when you see Paul figuring out like the beginning of Get Back, you're just like, oh yeah, keep going.
That's it. I was just struck too by how everything George did. I mean, he basically is presenting to them All Things Must Pass, and they were kind of not really into it. And, Something became one of the best Beatles songs ever, but like, there just didn't seem to be the and I think the dynamic there you really could see, right?
Yeah.
That George was coming into his own, and Paul and John were just kind of not seeing it and weren't in the headspace to care. And they kind of broke up. It also, like, when you watch that, you're like, okay, now I get it. They should have broken up. Like, it was time.
Yeah. Or,
The breakup seems sad. It makes it feel almost freeing in some ways.
Right. I mean, the sad thing is that they couldn't sort of do some solo stuff and then still come back together and be happy and all. But it's interesting to me also that, like, for the album Let It Be, they just ended up with like the two weakest George songs that he was presenting. I mean, I Mean Mine is like a throwaway. And they kind of fleshed it out because it was in the movie. And so they felt like they needed to put it on the album. And For You Blue is just kind of a tossed off bluesy thing. But, then he's like, oh, here's All Things Must Pass. Nah, here's, I'm working on something. Well, we'll get to that. We'll get to Here Comes the Sun. Even Old Brown Shoe, which was the flip side of Don't Let Me Down, is like better than those songs. But, it was almost like George was like, fine, just do these ones. I'll keep the good ones for myself.
Yeah, right. It's true. And for me, for my money, All Things Must Pass is the best Beatles solo record.
How does it feel when you're on stage playing your songs with this band? Is that some kind of peak life thing for you, or is it just kind of like, this is what I should be doing?
It's amazing. It really is. And just that people, to see like people dancing or people into it is super gratifying. Yeah, it's awesome. And I don't know if I'll ever get used to it, but that's good. Like I get a total thrill from it. And again, we haven't played out live in about a year. And I think we have an adage that every time we get together, and one of the reasons, by the way, is I'm writing songs for a third record, but
awesome.
We often say we should do this more often, but then we add, and that's why we shouldn't. And I think that one of the beauties of this band, because everybody else in the band has other things they're doing, is the second it starts to feel like work or feels like it's a slog or too much, then it's not fun anymore. And I do like that every time we get together, it feels super fresh and super exciting, and we want to do more of it. And that's a sweet spot to be in, right?
Well, you have this built-in schedule thing where from February now through hopefully October, you got this other job that you're doing, and you're traveling, and you're and it's pretty intense work. So it would be hard. It's not like you're going to plan a little mini tour in the middle of that.
Right. Exactly.
So the summer festivals are out for Sonic 45.
Yeah. I do think one of the goals is at some point to do like a mini Midwest thing where we do like Madison and Minneapolis and Milwaukee or something, and hopefully we can do that. When we've had a few pops after a gig, we're talking about Japan, but that's just.
That'd be great.
It would be awesome, but it'd probably never happen. Everyone's like, you'll be huge in Japan. I'm like, I've never been to Japan. I would love to go. It'd be amazing to do that.
So to go back to you as a kid, you're listening to the Tigers on the radio with Ernie Harnwell and Paul Carey, right? Like your specific introduction to baseball and broadcasting was on listening on radio more than watching on television?
Probably. I definitely watched a lot of Braves and Cubs games because when we got cable, they were on every day. But yeah, Ernie and Paul on radio, and that's my other YouTube thing that I'll go back and find old radio broadcasts. And the way they did the games on the radio in the late 70s and through the 80s is kind of how I grew to love the sport. And I think they had it right. And, if anyone listens to them and the way they did their broadcasts and then listens to White Sox radio, you'll hear absolute influence. And hopefully it's like music where, it's not necessarily copying, where there probably are some moments where I'm totally copying. But that happens in music too. But, trying to then blend it into the way I like to present baseball in 2026. There's just nothing better than feeling like you can watch a play develop through the radio. And the only thing you know about what happens on a baseball field is through the words you're hearing. Your eyes are your ears. And I just find that fascinating and super challenging. And I'm always trying to get better at it. And it's an art form. It really is. And the people who have done it the best, I just have the utmost respect for them. I think John Miller, in current days, is probably number one. He just puts you in the ballpark, and the way he sets up pitches, there's a rhythm to it. It's awesome, and I absolutely adore it. I could, if you basically told me I could only experience baseball through the radio and never watch a game again, I'd be sad in a way, but I could still be a huge fan. I could do it.
Was your dream from the start to do radio as opposed to television?
Yeah, I did want to do radio, and I started in radio, and I worked in radio for a long time doing a million different things. And then the opportunity to do baseball came along in 1999 on television. Right. In Milwaukee. Matt Vasgersian was the voice of the Brewers. He was tabbed to do some national games on Fox and eventually the XFL. He was the original voice of the XFL. And I was asked if I wanted to, they knew that I wanted to do play-by-play, and they asked if I wanted to take a shot at it. I gladly said yes. And so really the first television I had ever done was Major League Baseball. I was not a TV guy, and I never felt like I was a TV guy. I always felt like I was a baseball guy. And so I did baseball full time for 20 years, essentially on big league television. And when I turned 50 during COVID and the White Sox radio job opened up, I thought, if not now, never. And that's probably why, I started the band when I was 45. I figured I wouldn't start a band at 55. So if I'm going to do it, I better do it. And so that thought process was probably similar to starting the band. I thought I could continue to do TV and be happy, and that would be fine. But there was something about doing radio that I always wanted. And I'm glad I made that decision. It was the best career decision I've ever made.
Just because I had associated you with Theo because of the Cubs and then also Hot Stove Cool Music. I remember at the time that Theo had left, I think, in the Cubs in like mid-November of 2020. And then I think you announced you were leaving like, 2.5 weeks later, something like that. Yeah. Was there a connection there, or was that just a coincidence?
Total coincidence. We kind of laughed about it when we talked, but no, it was a total coincidence. I just think COVID, that whole year everything changed. The world changed. Mark, I have not seen a movie in a theater since COVID.
Really?
I cannot believe. And I used to go to movies. I used to go to matinees on the road. I would go, and then in the off season, I'd go to 1 or 2 movies a week. And I have not stepped foot in a theater since. I go to way fewer rock shows than I did before. Age is a part of it, but I think that I will call them bad habits, crept in, and that is, when in doubt, get some sleep, as opposed to when in doubt, go out and, see the world and hear new music and all that stuff. Fortunately, we have a soon to turn 25-year-old son who goes to more shows than anyone I know, and he'll drag me out to see bands. The last show I saw was Viagra Boys at the Salt Shed, and it was an outdoor show in September, and it was great, and I loved it, and I left early. I was like 45 minutes in, I'm like, I got to work tomorrow. These guys are great. I know you're going to stick through the encore, but I'm good. And
you're like, I get it.
But
it wasn't like a post-COVID crowd anxiety thing. It was more just, I've heard enough.
Yeah. I was like 45 minutes in. I'm like, yeah, I'm good. But I'm glad I went. And it's one of those nights where I drive home and I say, I should do that more often.
Right. Both the, getting out and seeing something and giving yourself permission not to guilt trip yourself if you're like ready to go.
Right.
See, I'm used to that. I'm used to being married to someone who is doing early morning radio. I'm used to the early hook. So if it's not working, it's like, okay, we'll get out of here.
And I will also say, last winter we went and saw Johnny Marr, and like it was the first time he had seen him, and like to see the bands and artists that I loved and he loves now too. Like that experience that I've taken him to see the Rolling Stones and the Who, and I took him to see Wilco, and like Wilco's now his favorite band. So like that is
nice.
I really didn't force him.
The fact that you two were able to share these experiences together is great. That's just special because that's, music bonds you from generation to generation. So
that's right.
I'm always happy when we can do that in our household. How much of an adjustment was there after doing 20 years of television to go to radio and to have a new partner and to have a new team that you're covering?
It was definitely an adjustment, especially in spring training and in April. We were still not able to be around the team, and we didn't travel the first month. But once we started to travel, I kind of got embedded with the team, and White Sox were really good that year. Darren Jackson is awesome. And so it was an adjustment for sure, but I kind of embraced it. And I was just hyper focused on getting better at radio every single day and every single year. But yeah, I did some TV that year too. So kind of bouncing back and forth was even more challenging to make sure that, okay, this is a TV game and this is a radio game. They're super different, very different experiences. There's less talking on TV. There's less description on TV. But on radio, you just have to constantly remind people where the ball is, what's the score, what's the count, how many outs are there, who's on base, what inning are you in. I mean, the 7 or 8 most basic things you just have to keep repeating in fresh ways because that's what people need to hear. You cannot go 5 minutes without telling them what the score is. You can't do it on radio because there's nothing worse than turning on a game and going,
some broadcast teams do that and it drives me crazy. I'm always like, what's the score? And then they'll even go to commercial break. I'm like, what's the score?
Right. That's it.
Because you never know when someone's turning it on and turning it off and getting out of the car or getting into the car or any of that stuff. It would be interesting to go back to like when I was like listening on my little round red ball of a Panasonic AM radio to, the Cubs games when it was like Vince Lloyd and Lou Boudreau. I feel like if I had a recording of those, and maybe the Museum of Broadcast Communication would have those, it would have been much more like here, wind up and the pitch, wind up in the pitch. And I feel like radio now is like more of this balance of keeping you up on the pitches and the balls and the strikes and what's happening on the field, but also like these kind of insights and a little more, not, I wouldn't say talk radio, but more of a sense of your personalities coming out and talking about things other than, every single wind up.
Yeah, well, there's a reason for that. They all worked solo. Even, the Paul and Ernie, I mean, Paul would rarely chime in when Ernie was doing play-by-play and vice versa. But when it was your innings, you basically were running the show. Now it's really a partnership. And so you're trying to be more efficient. You're trying to create room for your partner to analyze the whatever we just watched. So there's kind of that song and dance that you have to do to kind of make it work. But if I worked solo, I think it would sound a little more old school, so to speak. We just have more information now, too. But I agree that, way back when, a lot of it was, here's the pitch, ball one, and then silence. Here's the next pitch, strike one. The structure was just give me exactly what's happening and don't give me a ton of color. I think Vince Scully, obviously he learned from Red Barber, and then Ernie, talk about the weather. What are the flags doing out in center? What's the sun right now? Where's the shade on the field? Who's on deck? What's the third base coach doing? Sometimes on radio, you just have to sit back and look around and see something and go, oh, that's interesting, and just mention it. Because, again, it doesn't exist in the radio listener's mind until you say it. And I love looking around and finding things that may not be obvious to people.
I mean, like if your team's down 10-2 in the 8th inning and it's clear they're not going to win the game, it's the 8th inning, do you feel more pressure or just, impulse to just come up with other interesting stuff to talk about?
Sometimes, but I also fall back on this philosophy, and this is how I learned and listening to Ernie. Generally, most people tune in and want to hear a game on the radio because it's comforting. And when they do that, they want to hear the game. And there's a rhythm and a routine to the game. So if you stick to kind of calling the game and you pick your spots to do those other things, I think you're always going to be in a pretty good spot. Where I think the danger comes in is in a 12-1 game, the last 2 innings, you just stop describing anything that's happening. Then it does kind of become a talk show, which baseball and the radio is not. So, I did a season that was the White Sox went 41-121, and it was not a fun season. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it was. But we were able to get through it because we started over every day and we just called the game. We kept it simple. And if you do that and you stick to that philosophy, I think that you become trustworthy and people just know that when they tune in, they're going to hear a ball game. It's kind of like turning on a golf tournament. Like I am not a golf fan, but like, especially in February and March, you talked about baseball as a sign of spring and summer. Like if I had a Sunday afternoon where I have nothing going on, I'll just turn on golf and like just hearing the sounds of a golf tournament and the announcers and the way they do it. Like it's just so soothing to me. And obviously you can fall asleep to a golf tournament. You can fall asleep to a baseball broadcast.
Sure.
I take that as a compliment because it's comforting and it feels right. And that's kind of my goal.
You can come in at any moment and someone's going to be swinging the club or swinging the bat.
Yeah.
And you're going to know what's going on.
Yep.
So
exactly right. And something interesting can happen when it's 13-1, where there can be a pitch or a play or a disagreement, and we can get into that little tiny thing that isn't important in the big picture, but it's interesting in that moment. And that always is the case, no matter what the score is.
Right. It is harder to do the broadcast when a team is historically bad versus, the story you're telling during the season is, whether they're going to get to the playoffs, or now the stories may be, how are they going to, continue rebounding. But I would imagine that the story you're telling, and whether it's downbeat or upbeat, does have an effect on your job.
It does. But again, I do think that, you kind of remember what your job is and to stay in your lane. And I think we are in an era now of hot takes and everybody has an opinion on everything. And sometimes people just want to hear a ball game and they just don't need to hear what my opinion is on everything. And I have opinions and I will give them if it feels right in the moment. There's things in the game that I love and things I wish maybe we could change. I'm a uniform dork, so if I see something awesome, I'll talk about that. If I see something that I don't love, I will mention that. The Brewers have new, beautiful baby blue jerseys, and they're wearing gray pants on the road. Like, it should be baby blue jerseys and baby blue pants. And so when we play the Brewers, I'm going to say that. But that's just fun stuff. But I do think that at the end of the day, I just kind of stick to what I know, and all the greats that I grew up loving, that's kind of how they did it.
If you were made commissioner for an hour, what would you do?
That's a great question. I think the pitch clock has saved our sport. I think it's the biggest change that has been made in the last, 30 years. The sport was going in a bad direction prior to the pitch clock. And I think the way the game moves now is awesome. I guess if I were commissioner, nothing specific, and I'm not saying that this isn't happening, but I would make sure to remind everyone that baseball is different. And while a lot of other sports have become successful doing certain things, it doesn't mean that necessarily baseball should follow suit. And what I mean by that is the NFL has 8 4-team divisions, and I think they have 7 playoff teams. And I think, as baseball is veering toward expansion to get to 32 teams, I could see baseball kind of mirroring what football's standings look like, right? And maybe even similar type playoff setup. I don't want to be football. I don't want to be basketball. I don't want to be hockey. I want baseball to be as baseball-y as possible. And part of the charm of it is it's different. We play twice as many games as, the other two sports. We play 10 times as many games as the NFL. And I think that kind of protecting that is important. And we might end up playing a fewer games, maybe 156 at some point, but I wouldn't go to 120. I do think that there's something special about the 6-month grind of a baseball season, and I love that. I love that it's every single day, and I wouldn't want to take that away. So if anything, I guess if I were commissioner, I would want to preserve the things that I love about the sport that have been around certainly throughout my entire lifetime.
It's more protecting things than changing things at this point.
Yeah, I think maybe... Right. It was a roundabout way of getting to your much more succinct point. When you make big changes, generally they're there forever. We have a runner at second in the 10th inning now. That's never going away. I don't see how it would ever go away. I don't see any scenario where, right, it's like the shootout in hockey. Like once you make that leap, you're never going back. And whether you love the runner at second or not, and I have my moments where I love it and I have my moments where I hate it, once you do that, that's it. You're there forever. Once you break the seal on interleague play and you're playing every team, as opposed to when we grew up, it was AL, NL, NL.
Right.
That's forever. So I would be
robot umps.
Clock excluded, pitch clock excluded. That's the best change that we've made. Some of these other tweaks we're making, just make sure that we have all the unintended consequences sorted out before we actually implement it.
The thing with having a 162 game season is that the season's important because it's so long and there's so many games. So yeah, if you make it like, hockey even, where there are just so many teams making the playoffs, it's like, well, wait, why did you play 162 games if you're just going to let in 16 teams or something?
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. And then part of me is like, why do we play a 3-game series and a 5-game series and a 7-game series? Basketball and hockey, all their series are 7, and baseball should be the longest. So right. You could make a case that baseball should play 7-game series in the wild card and 7-game series in the division, but then you're talking about a 6-week slog that I don't know if anybody wants.
Well, it's because of the weather. It's just because the weather's changing and stuff.
And
but yeah, right. But I mean, I hated when they had the 1-game wild card, and I'm just like, wait, it's going to come down to 1 game in baseball of all things? Right. That drove me crazy. Fantastic talking with you, Len. I really appreciate it, as always. Please keep me posted on album number 3 and everything else, and I get to listen to you in the meantime. And it should be an interesting year for the White Sox.
I agree. I think it's things are looking good, and it'll be a really fun summer in Chicago. Let's put it that way, baseball-wise.
Yeah. Kyle Teal came over from the Red Sox, so, bunch of Red Sox guys actually who look pretty good for the White Sox. My friend who's a Red Sox fan, when the White Sox traded Crochet over there, I was just like, oh man, another, great White Sox pitcher going to play for someone else. He's like, yeah, but he's like, the White Sox got much better players this time than they did for Sale. I think that's right. Braden Montgomery might be the best of the bunch, and he hasn't even gotten here yet. Yeah. So anyway, all right. Well, enjoy your days off, and I'll listen for you on the next broadcast. Thanks, Mark. That's it for episode 216 of Caropop. Thanks so much to Len Kasper for taking us inside his doubleheader of music making and baseball broadcasting. You could order Sonic 45's music, including the albums Supersonic and Space and Time, through the band's Bandcamp page, sonic45.bandcamp.com. You also can hear Kasper call White Sox games all season long on WMVP AM ESPN 1000. Caropop is produced by Chris Wake, our very own MVP. Thanks to all who support Caropop. If you'd like to throw something into the Caropop kitty, we'd be much appreciative. And I'll give you a shout out on the next episode. Please go to caropop.com. Thanks so much for listening and being here. I'm Mark Caro. Please follow Caropop and the so-called socials at Caropopcast. You can follow me as well at Mark Caro at MarkCaro. Please share this episode, subscribe here and on YouTube, tell your friends, and return next week for another Caropop conversation. Thanks.